The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training ground as General Marcus Thompson surveyed the scene before him. 13 of his best marksmen lay flat on their stomachs, rifles positioned on bipods, eyes focused through high-powered scopes. The target stood proudly at 4,000 meters away, a distance that separated good shooters from legendary ones. The general had been watching for the past 3 hours as each of his elite snipers took their turn, and each had failed to hit the mark. The wind whistled across the open field, carrying with it the frustration that hung heavy in the air. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were hand-picked specialists, each with years of training and countless successful missions under their belts. Sergeant Rodriguez had completed tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. Corporal Jenkins held the base record for precision shooting. Lieutenant Morrison had earned 3 medals of valor for his sharpshooting skills in combat zones. Yet today, none of them could conquer the 4,000-meter challenge. General Thompson removed his cap and ran his fingers through his graying hair. He had organized this exercise to identify the most skilled marksman in his unit, someone who could take on the most difficult assignments that required extreme precision. The military had received intelligence about high-value targets positioned at extraordinary distances, and conventional sniping techniques weren't sufficient. They needed someone exceptional, someone who could make the impossible shot when everything depended on it. The first shooter, Sergeant Rodriguez, had come closest. His bullet struck just 2 feet from the target's center. The others had missed by margins ranging from 5 to 15 feet. At 4,000 meters, even the slightest miscalculation in wind speed, bullet drop, or atmospheric pressure could send a perfectly aimed shot wildly off course. The general understood this, but understanding didn't make the situation any less frustrating. Behind the group of military snipers, a small crowd had gathered to watch the exercise. Among them stood Maria Santos, a 34-year-old civilian contractor who worked in the base's communications department. She was a quiet woman who kept to herself, always polite but never one to draw attention. Her colleagues knew little about her background beyond the fact that she had moved to the area 6 months ago and seemed to know her job well. Maria watched the proceedings with growing interest. She noticed how each sniper made minute adjustments to their scopes, how they studied the wind flags positioned at various intervals along the range, and how they controlled their breathing before taking each shot. She observed their techniques with the eye of someone who understood the complexities involved. Though no one around her realized the depth of her knowledge, the general walked along the line of shooters, offering encouragement despite his disappointment. He knew that 4,000 meters was an extreme distance even for his best men. Most successful sniper shots in combat occurred at distances between 800 and 2,200 meters. The longest confirmed kill shot in military history had been made at just over 3,500 meters by a Canadian sniper. What he was asking his men to do pushed the boundaries of human capability and technology. As the 13th and final sniper prepared for his attempt, General Thompson felt a mixture of hope and resignation. Corporal Williams was young but had shown exceptional promise during his training. His scores on shorter-range exercises had been consistently impressive. If anyone could make this shot, it might be him. Corporal Williams settled into position with the confidence of youth. He spent several minutes adjusting his scope, studying the environmental conditions and calculating the trajectory needed to send his bullet across nearly 2.5 miles of open terrain. The other snipers watched silently, each hoping their colleague would succeed where they had failed. The shot rang out across the training ground, echoing off the distant hills. Through binoculars, the spotters tracked the bullet's path until it struck the earth approximately 8 feet to the left of the target. Another miss, the 13th failure of the day. General Thompson walked to the center of the group, his expression serious but not unkind. He understood that what he had asked of his men bordered on the impossible. The combination of distance, wind conditions, and equipment limitations created a challenge that even the most skilled marksman might not overcome. He knew these were good soldiers who had proven themselves in real combat, situations where lives depended on their accuracy. The assembled crowd began to disperse as it became clear that the exercise was concluding without success. Some soldiers returned to their regular duties while others gathered around the snipers to offer words of encouragement. The general began mentally preparing the report he would need to submit to his superiors, explaining why none of his marksmen had been able to complete the 4,000-meter challenge. It was then that Maria Santos stepped forward from the crowd. She approached the general with a hesitant but determined expression, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. The soldiers who noticed her approach assumed she wanted to ask a question about the exercise or perhaps offer some words of encouragement to the disappointed marksman. "Excuse me, General," Maria said in a soft voice that barely carried over the wind. "I was wondering if I might be allowed to try." The general turned to face her, his eyebrows raised in surprise. He recognized her as one of the civilian contractors, but couldn't recall her name or specific role on the base. The idea of a civilian, particularly a woman with no apparent military training, attempting what 13 expert snipers had failed to accomplish seemed almost absurd. "I appreciate your interest," the general replied diplomatically, "but this is a highly specialized military exercise requiring years of training and experience." Maria nodded respectfully but didn't step away. "I understand, sir, but I do have some experience with long-range shooting. I know it might seem presumptuous, but I believe I might be able to help." The general studied her face, looking for any sign that she might be joking or making light of the situation. He saw only quiet confidence and genuine sincerity. Around them, the soldiers who had overheard the conversation began to take notice, some smiling at what they assumed was naive enthusiasm from someone who didn't understand the complexity of what they had been attempting. General Thompson found himself in an unusual position. His 13 expert marksmen had failed at the 4,000-meter challenge, and now a civilian contractor was asking for permission to attempt the same shot. Protocol suggested he should politely decline and move on, but something in Maria's steady gaze made him pause. He had built his military career on recognizing talent and potential, even when it appeared in unexpected packages. "What kind of experience are you referring to?" the general asked, his tone shifting from polite dismissal to genuine curiosity. Maria hesitated for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "I grew up on a ranch in Montana, sir. My father taught me to shoot when I was 8 years old. We dealt with predators that threatened our livestock, sometimes at very long distances. I've been shooting regularly for over 25 years. The soldiers nearby exchanged glances, some still skeptical, while others began to show interest. Ranch shooting was different from military sniping, but anyone who had grown up in rural areas knew that farmers and ranchers often developed exceptional marksmanship skills out of necessity. Protecting livestock from wolves, coyotes, and other predators sometimes required precise shots at considerable distances. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had made the closest shot of the day, stepped forward. "With respect, ma'am, ranch shooting and military precision are very different things. The equipment, the distance, the conditions is not the same." Maria nodded in acknowledgement. "You're absolutely right, Sergeant. But the fundamentals remain the same. Reading wind, calculating bullet drop, controlling breathing, and maintaining steady aim. The principles don't change even if the circumstances do." General Thompson weighed his options. Allowing a civilian to attempt the shot could be seen as undermining his trained snipers, but it could also demonstrate his willingness to think outside conventional boundaries. More importantly, he was curious about what this quiet woman might be capable of. Military history was filled with stories of unexpected heroes who emerged from unlikely backgrounds. "Tell me more about this ranch shooting," the general said, crossing his arms. Maria's voice grew stronger as she spoke about familiar territory. "Our ranch covered 15,000 acres in the Absaroka Mountains. The terrain was rough, with deep valleys and high ridges. When predators threatened our cattle, we couldn't always get close. I remember making shots at distances that stretched our equipment to its limits. My father used to say that Montana taught patience and precision better than any training program ever could." She paused, then continued. "I also spent 4 years in college on a competitive shooting team. We focused on precision rifle competitions, including some extreme long-range events. I never served in the military, but I've been shooting competitively and practically for most of my life." The general processed this information while observing the reactions of his soldiers. Some remained skeptical, but others appeared intrigued by the possibility that someone with non-military training might approach the challenge from a different perspective. In his experience, fresh viewpoints sometimes led to breakthrough solutions. "The equipment we're using is highly specialized," Lieutenant Morrison pointed out. "These rifles and scopes are calibrated for military applications. The ballistics calculations are complex." Maria smiled slightly. "I understand, Lieutenant. But I noticed something while watching the attempts. Everyone has been making similar adjustments and using similar techniques. Sometimes a different approach can yield different results. General Thompson made his decision. Very well, Miss Santos. I'll give you one attempt. Sergeant Rodriguez, please brief her on the rifle specifications and safety protocols. The announcement created a buzz of conversation among the gathered soldiers. Some were excited to see what would happen, while others worried about the precedent of allowing civilians to participate in military exercises. The 13 marksmen who had failed their attempts watched with a mixture of curiosity and wounded pride. Sergeant Rodriguez approached Maria with professional courtesy despite his skepticism. He began explaining the rifle's specifications: a .50 caliber precision weapon with a sophisticated scope system, chambered for match-grade ammunition specifically designed for long-range accuracy. The rifle weighed nearly 30 pounds when fully equipped and required significant strength and stability to operate effectively. The ballistics computer accounts for atmospheric pressure, temperature, humidity, and wind speed, Rodriguez explained. But at 4,000 meters, small errors in any of these calculations can result in significant misses. The bullet will be in flight for approximately 6 seconds, during which wind conditions can change multiple times. Maria listened intently, asking technical questions that demonstrated her understanding of ballistics principles. She inquired about the specific ammunition being used, the rifle's muzzle velocity, and the scope's magnification settings. Her questions impressed Rodriguez, who realized that her knowledge extended far beyond casual recreational shooting. The wind is the biggest challenge today, Rodriguez continued. It's been gusting between 8 and 15 miles per hour with changing directions. You'll need to account for wind drift across the entire bullet path, not just at the shooting position. Maria walked to the firing line and examined the rifle carefully. She tested its weight and balance, adjusted the bipod legs to accommodate her height, and studied the scope's reticle system. The other soldiers watched as she methodically familiarized herself with the equipment, noting her systematic approach. "May I take a few minutes to observe the wind patterns?" Maria asked. General Thompson nodded his approval. Maria spent the next 10 minutes studying the flags and vegetation along the range, watching how the wind affected different areas at various times. She noticed patterns that the previous shooters had either missed or failed to account for properly. The wind wasn't random. It followed predictable cycles based on the terrain and atmospheric conditions. She also studied the target itself, using binoculars to examine its position and the area around it. At 4,000 meters, the target appeared as a tiny speck even through high-powered optics. She noted the lighting conditions, the background terrain, and any visual references that might help her gauge the accuracy of her shot. "The wind pattern changes every 45 seconds, Maria announced to the group. There's a brief period when it dies down significantly before picking up again from a slightly different direction." Several soldiers exchanged glances. They had been firing during various wind conditions without identifying this pattern. If Maria was correct, timing the shot properly could significantly improve accuracy chances. Maria settled into position behind the rifle, adjusting her body alignment and grip. She had noticed that several of the previous shooters had used techniques optimized for shorter ranges, which weren't necessarily ideal for extreme distances. Her ranch experience had taught her that ultra-long shots required different fundamentals and mental approaches. The crowd fell silent as Maria prepared for her attempt. General Thompson found himself hoping she would succeed, not just for the sake of solving his tactical problem, but because her quiet confidence had impressed him. Win or lose, she had already demonstrated courage and knowledge that commanded respect. Maria positioned herself behind the massive rifle with a grace that surprised the watching soldiers. Her movements were deliberate and confident, each adjustment made with the precision of someone who had spent years perfecting their technique. She didn't rush through the setup process like some of the earlier shooters had done, instead taking time to ensure every detail was perfect. The rifle felt different from anything she had used before, but the fundamental principles remained the same: weight distribution, sight alignment, breathing control, and trigger discipline. These were constants that transcended specific equipment. She adjusted the bipod legs to create a stable platform, then positioned her body to create the most natural and sustainable shooting position possible. "The scope is already zeroed for this distance," Sergeant Rodriguez informed her quietly. "The ballistics computer has calculated the basic trajectory, but you'll need to make your own adjustments for current conditions." Maria nodded while peering through the scope. The target appeared impossibly small and distant, a tiny dark square against the brown hillside backdrop. At this magnification, even her heartbeat could cause the crosshairs to move significantly. She began the mental calculations that her father had taught her decades ago, combining mathematical precision with intuitive understanding gained through thousands of hours of practice. The wind flags along the range told a story that most people couldn't read, but Maria had learned to interpret their language during countless hours spent protecting her family's cattle. She watched the vegetation sway, noted how dust moved across open areas, and felt the air currents against her face. The pattern she had identified earlier was holding true. Every 45 seconds, the wind would calm for approximately 8 to 10 seconds before shifting direction. General Thompson checked his watch, noting that Maria had been studying conditions for nearly 15 minutes. Most of his snipers had taken their shots within 5 to 10 minutes of getting into position. He wondered if she was overthinking the challenge, or if her methodical approach represented a different philosophy entirely. "Take your time," the general said quietly. "There's no rush." Maria heard him but remained focused on her observations. She was learning the rhythm of this particular environment, understanding how the terrain channeled wind currents and how atmospheric conditions affected bullet flight at this extreme range. Each of the previous shooters had been skilled, but they had relied primarily on technology and standard procedures. Maria was combining technical knowledge with instinctive understanding developed through years of real-world application. Soldiers watching began to murmur among themselves as Maria continued her preparations. Some expressed impatience, while others remarked on her thoroughness. Lieutenant Morrison noted that her breathing pattern had already slowed to the deep, controlled rhythm that experienced marksmen use to maintain steady aim. Corporal Jenkins observed that she hadn't touched the rifle's trigger yet, keeping her finger safely alongside the guard until she was completely ready. After 20 minutes of preparation, Maria finally positioned her eye against the scope and placed her finger on the trigger. The rifle felt solid and stable in her hands, its weight distributed evenly across the bipod and her supporting arm. She began the final sequence of calculations, accounting for temperature, humidity, altitude, and the complex wind patterns she had observed. The bullet would travel approximately 2.5 miles in roughly 6 seconds. During that time, gravity would pull it downward while wind would push it sideways. The rifle's ballistics computer had calculated the basic trajectory, but Maria needed to add her own corrections based on real-time conditions. Too much correction would send the bullet wide. Too little would result in another miss. She watched the wind flags and waited for the pattern to repeat itself. When the 45-second mark approached, she began her breathing cycle. Deep breath in, half breath out, hold. The crosshairs settled on her chosen aiming point, slightly left and above the actual target to compensate for wind drift and bullet drop that the computer might not have calculated perfectly. The moment arrived when the wind flags drooped and the vegetation stilled. Maria had perhaps 8 seconds of optimal conditions. She applied gentle, steady pressure to the trigger, using the technique her father had taught her 30 years earlier. The trigger broke cleanly, surprising her slightly as all good triggers should. The rifle's recoil was substantial but manageable. Maria maintained her position and continued looking through the scope, watching for any sign of bullet impact. At this distance, it would take several seconds for the bullet to reach its destination. The watching soldiers held their collective breath, straining to see through binoculars and spotting scopes. 6 seconds felt like an eternity. Maria remained, motionless behind the rifle, her eye still pressed against the scope. She had made the best shot she was capable of under these conditions, incorporating everything she had learned about long-range shooting throughout her lifetime. Now physics and fate would determine the outcome. Sergeant Rodriguez was the first to see the impact through his high-powered spotting scope. His sharp intake of breath caught everyone's attention, followed by a moment of stunned silence. Then he began to smile, shaking his head in disbelief. "Hit," he announced quietly. Then louder, "Direct hit, center mass." The training ground erupted in surprised exclamations and applause. Soldiers who had been skeptical minutes earlier now stared at Maria with newfound respect and amazement. The 13 expert marksmen who had failed their attempts rushed to their spotting scopes to confirm what Rodriguez had announced. General. Thompson grabbed his binoculars and focused on the distant target. Even at maximum magnification, he could barely make out the target, but the spotters were unanimous in their confirmation. After 13 failures by his best snipers, a civilian contractor had accomplished what seemed impossible. Maria slowly lifted her head from the scope, her expression calm despite the magnitude of what she had just achieved. She engaged the rifle's safety and sat back on her heels, finally allowing herself to process what had happened. The shot had felt good when she fired it, but at such an extreme distance, confidence and reality didn't always align. "Outstanding work," General Thompson said, approaching Maria with genuine admiration. "That was an exceptional shot under extremely difficult conditions." The soldiers gathered around, eager to understand how someone with no military training had succeeded where their elite marksmen had failed. Maria found herself surrounded by questions about her technique, her background, and her approach to the challenge. She answered each query thoughtfully, sharing insights that the soldiers realized could improve their own long-range shooting capabilities. Corporal Williams, the youngest of the failed marksmen, asked the question that everyone was thinking. "What did you do differently from the rest of us?" Maria considered the question carefully before responding. "I think I approached it more like hunting than like target shooting. When you're protecting livestock from predators, you don't get multiple chances. You have to be patient, read the environment completely, and make the first shot count." Military. Precision shooting is more technical, but sometimes old-fashioned hunting instincts can complement modern techniques. News of Maria's incredible shot spread through the military base faster than wildfire. Within hours, soldiers from different units were seeking her out, wanting to hear the story firsthand and learn from her techniques. The communications department where she worked suddenly became a popular destination as curious personnel found excuses to visit and catch a glimpse of the woman who had accomplished the impossible. General Thompson spent the rest of that day thinking about the implications of what had occurred. His carefully selected team of elite marksmen represented years of military investment in training, equipment, and experience. Yet a civilian contractor with ranch experience had outperformed them all on a challenge that pushed the boundaries of human capability. This wasn't just an interesting anomaly. It represented a potential paradigm shift in how the military approached specialized training. The following morning, the general requested a private meeting with Maria in his office. She arrived promptly, dressed in her usual conservative business attire, looking more like an accountant than someone who had just made one of the longest successful shots in military history. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the excitement that still buzzed throughout the base. "Please have a seat," General Thompson said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I want to discuss what happened yesterday and explore some possibilities for the future." Maria settled into the chair, her hands folded in her lap. "I hope I didn't cause any problems by asking to participate, sir. I understand that it might have been inappropriate." The general shook his head. "On the contrary, you may have solved a significant problem for us. We've been tasked with developing capabilities for extreme long-range operations, and conventional training methods haven't been producing the results we need. Your success yesterday suggests that we might be overlooking important approaches to this challenge." He leaned forward, his expression serious, but interested. "I've been reviewing your personnel file. You have a degree in mathematics and physics. You've worked in communications technology for several defense contractors, and now we know about your exceptional marksmanship skills. That's an unusual combination of qualifications." Maria nodded. "I've always been interested in technical problems that require both theoretical understanding and practical application. Long-range shooting combines mathematics, physics, and hands-on skill in ways that I find intellectually satisfying." The general pulled out a folder containing reports and documentation from the previous day's exercise. "I've been thinking about organizing a more comprehensive evaluation. We need to understand exactly what you did differently and whether your techniques can be taught to our marksmen. Would you be willing to work with our training team to develop new approaches to extreme long-range shooting?" The offer surprised Maria. She had expected to return to her regular duties and perhaps face some awkward questions about overstepping boundaries. Instead, the general was asking her to contribute to military training development. "I would be honored to help, sir. Though I should mention that I'm not sure how much of what I do can be easily taught. Some of it comes from years of experience that can't be compressed into a training program. General Thompson understood her point. Military training excelled at teaching standardized procedures and technical skills, but it struggled with developing the kind of intuitive understanding that came from years of real-world application. We're willing to invest the time necessary to explore different approaches. Your success yesterday wasn't just about making a difficult shot. It demonstrated a different way of thinking about the problem. Over the next several days, Maria found herself working closely with the base's training staff to analyze her technique and develop new instructional methods. They recorded her going through the entire process of preparing for an extreme long-range shot, from initial environmental assessment to final execution. Video analysis revealed subtle differences in her approach that weren't immediately obvious to casual observers. The most significant difference was her patience. While military marksmen were trained to engage targets efficiently and move to new positions, Maria's ranch background had taught her to wait for optimal conditions rather than trying to force a shot during suboptimal circumstances. She would spend considerably more time reading environmental conditions and identifying patterns that others missed. Her mathematical background also contributed to her success. While the rifle's ballistics computer provided basic calculations, Maria performed additional computations in her head, accounting for factors that the standard software didn't consider. She calculated wind drift over the entire bullet path rather than just at the shooting position, and she made intuitive adjustments based on atmospheric pressure changes that she could sense but not measure precisely. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been initially skeptical, became one of her most enthusiastic students. She reads wind like a weatherman reads satellite images, he told his colleagues. She sees patterns and connections that the rest of us are missing. The training sessions revealed that Maria's success wasn't just about individual technique. It represented a different philosophy of marksmanship. Military snipers were taught to engage targets under whatever conditions existed, using technology and training to overcome environmental challenges. Maria's approach involved working with environmental conditions rather than fighting against them, waiting for opportunities rather than creating them through force. General Thompson observed these training sessions with growing interest. The military had invested heavily in technological solutions to long-range shooting challenges, developing sophisticated ballistics computers, advanced optics, and precision ammunition. While these tools were valuable, Maria's success suggested that human intuition and experience remained irreplaceable components of extreme marksmanship. 3 weeks after her initial success, the general organized another 4,000-meter challenge. This time, Maria would shoot alongside his original 13 marksmen, but they would have the opportunity to apply techniques they had learned during their training sessions with her. The exercise would test whether her methods could be successfully transferred to military snipers. The day of the second challenge arrived with better weather conditions than the first attempt. Wind speeds were lower and more consistent, temperature was stable, and visibility was excellent. These improved conditions would give everyone a better chance of success, but they would also make it easier to evaluate the effectiveness of different techniques. Maria approached this second attempt with less pressure but greater responsibility. Her first success could have been dismissed as luck or exceptional circumstances, but a second success would establish her methods as genuinely superior. More importantly, the performance of the soldiers who had trained with her would determine whether her techniques could be scaled beyond individual achievement. As the shooters prepared their equipment and studied conditions, Maria noticed that several of them were applying lessons from their training sessions. They spent more time observing wind patterns, made more conservative estimates of optimal shooting conditions, and demonstrated greater patience in their preparation routines. The question remained whether these behavioral changes would translate into improved accuracy at extreme range. The general watched the preparations with anticipation. If this exercise proved successful, it would justify a complete restructuring of the military's approach to long-range marksmanship training. If it failed, they would need to accept that Maria's success had been an unrepeatable individual achievement rather than a teachable methodology. The second 4,000-meter challenge began with palpable excitement throughout the military base. Word had spread beyond the original participants, and dozens of personnel had gathered to witness whether Maria's success could be repeated and whether the soldiers who had trained with her would demonstrate improved performance. The stakes felt higher this time because the results would determine the future direction of the military's long-range marksmanship program. General Thompson established the same basic parameters as the previous challenge, but with additional documentation and measurement systems in place. Military photographers recorded every aspect of the exercise, while ballistics experts monitored environmental conditions with sophisticated equipment. The data collected would be analyzed extensively regardless of the shooting results. Maria observed the preparation process with interest, noting how the soldiers had modified their approaches based on their training sessions with her. Sergeant Rodriguez spent considerably more time studying wind patterns before even touching his rifle. Lieutenant Morrison had adopted her technique of identifying optimal timing windows rather than shooting during whatever conditions happened to exist. The changes were subtle but significant. The first shooter was Corporal Williams, the youngest marksman who had made the final attempt during the previous challenge. He had been particularly attentive during the training sessions, asking detailed questions about Maria's methods and practicing her environmental reading techniques. His youth and openness to new approaches had made him an ideal student for non-traditional methods. Williams took nearly 25 minutes to prepare his shot, far longer than his previous attempt. He methodically observed wind conditions, studied the target through his scope, and waited for what he determined to be optimal circumstances. When he finally fired, his bullet struck just 18 inches from the target center, a dramatic improvement over his previous 8-foot miss. The crowd erupted in applause, but Williams looked disappointed despite the significant improvement. "I was aiming for center mass," he said, shaking his head. 18 inches is better than 8 feet, but it's still a miss." Maria approached him with an encouraging smile. "At 4,000 meters, 18 inches is exceptional accuracy. You demonstrated that the techniques work. The difference between 18 inches and dead center comes down to tiny variables that even perfect preparation can't always control." Sergeant Rodriguez took the second attempt, incorporating lessons he had learned about patience and environmental reading. His shot landed approximately 2 feet from target center, another significant improvement over his previous performance. The pattern was encouraging. The soldiers were clearly applying Maria's methods and achieving better results. As more marksmen took their turns, the improvement trend continued. While not every shot was dramatically better, the overall accuracy had increased substantially. Several soldiers achieved near misses that would have been considered exceptional under normal circumstances. The training sessions were clearly having a positive effect. Lieutenant Morrison made the 7th attempt of the day, and his shot came tantalizingly close to the target. Through spotting scopes, observers could see that his bullet had struck within 6 inches of center mass. The crowd fell silent as the measurement was confirmed. 6 inches at 4,000 meters represented extraordinary precision. "Outstanding shot," General Thompson announced. "That level of accuracy at this distance is remarkable by any standard." Morrison looked pleased but remained focused on his technique. "I felt like everything came together perfectly. The wind timing, the calculations, the equipment setup, it all aligned exactly as Maria taught us." The general made a note in his observation log. Morrison's success suggested that Maria's methods could indeed be successfully transferred to military marksmen, given sufficient time and proper instruction. The question remained whether she could duplicate her own previous success under these more scrutinized conditions. When Maria's turn arrived, she approached the firing line with the same methodical preparation that had characterized her first attempt. The watching soldiers fell silent as she began her environmental assessment routine, spending even more time than before studying wind patterns and atmospheric conditions. The pressure of expectations didn't seem to affect her concentration. She noticed that conditions were indeed better than during the first challenge, but better conditions also meant less room for error. With reduced wind and improved visibility, any mistakes in calculation or execution would be more apparent. The improved conditions were a double-edged sword that could either facilitate success or make failure more obvious. After 30 minutes of preparation, Maria settled into her shooting position. The rifle felt familiar now, and she had developed confidence in its capabilities and limitations. Her breathing slowed to the deep, controlled rhythm that indicated readiness, and she began the final sequence of calculations and adjustments. The wind pattern she had identified was holding steady, providing predictable windows of optimal conditions. As the timing approached, she applied gentle pressure to the trigger, using the same technique that had served her well throughout her shooting career. The rifle's recoil felt controlled and manageable, suggesting that her shooting position had been solid. Through the spotting scopes, observers tracked the bullet's impact. When the dust settled, Sergeant Rodriguez announced the result in a voice filled with amazement. Dead center, perfect hit. The training ground erupted in celebration as soldiers realized that Maria had not only duplicated her previous success, but had achieved even greater precision. 2 perfect hits at 4,000 meters in less than a month represented a level of consistency that few marksmen could achieve at any distance. General Thompson approached Maria with genuine admiration and professional interest. Congratulations on another exceptional shot. But I'm even more impressed by what your training methods have accomplished with our marksmen. The improvement across the board has been remarkable. Maria accepted the praise gracefully, while deflecting credit to the soldiers who had worked hard to master new techniques. The improvement shows that these men were already skilled marksmen, who just needed different approaches to reach their full potential. They did the hard work of changing established habits and learning new methods. The success of the second challenge validated General Thompson's decision to explore non-traditional approaches to marksmanship training. The data collected during both exercises would be analyzed and incorporated into new training protocols that combined military precision with ranch-style environmental reading skills. As the crowd began to disperse, several soldiers remained behind to ask Maria additional questions about her techniques. She found herself surrounded by marksmen eager to continue learning and improving their capabilities. The transformation from skeptical tolerance to enthusiastic acceptance had been complete. Corporal Williams, whose 18-inch near miss had started the day's success story, approached Maria with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding the difference between hunting and target shooting. Do you think there are other civilian skills that could improve military capabilities?" The question sparked an interesting discussion among the gathered soldiers about the potential value of non-military experience in specialized military applications. Maria's success had opened their minds to the possibility that valuable expertise existed outside traditional military channels. 6 months after Maria Santos made her first impossible shot, the military base had transformed its approach to long-range marksmanship training entirely. What began as a simple challenge to identify the best sniper had evolved into a comprehensive program that combined traditional military precision with unconventional techniques derived from civilian expertise. Maria found herself at the center of this transformation, serving as both instructor and continuing student. The success of Maria's methods had attracted attention from military leadership far beyond General Thompson's unit. Delegation teams from other bases arrived regularly to observe training sessions and learn about the integration of ranch-style environmental reading with military precision shooting. The program had become a model for how the military could identify and incorporate valuable skills from unexpected sources. General Thompson had formally requested that Maria transition from her communications role to become a full-time marksmanship instructor. The position represented a significant career change, but Maria accepted enthusiastically. Her work combined her love of shooting with her technical background and her desire to contribute meaningfully to military capabilities. The role also allowed her to continue developing and refining techniques that pushed the boundaries of long-range accuracy. The original 13 marksmen who had failed the first 4,000-meter challenge had all shown remarkable improvement under Maria's instruction. Sergeant Rodriguez had successfully completed 3 consecutive 4,000-meter shots during training exercises. Lieutenant Morrison had been selected to lead a new extreme long-range unit based on his mastery of the combined techniques. Even Corporal Williams, the youngest of the group, had developed into one of the most reliable long-distance marksmen on the base. The transformation extended beyond individual skill improvement to fundamental changes in military training philosophy. Traditional approaches emphasized standardized procedures and technological solutions, But Maria's success had demonstrated the irreplaceable value of intuitive understanding and environmental adaptation. The new training program balanced both approaches, creating marksmen who were both technically proficient and intuitively skilled. Maria's classes had become legendary throughout the military community. She taught soldiers to read landscapes like books, understanding how terrain features affected wind patterns and atmospheric conditions. Her students learned to feel barometric pressure changes in their bodies and to recognize subtle environmental cues that sophisticated instruments might miss. These skills complemented rather than replaced technological tools, creating a more complete approach to extreme marksmanship. The program's success had also changed Maria's personal life dramatically. She had discovered a sense of purpose and fulfillment that her previous work had never provided. Teaching soldiers skills that could save lives in combat situations gave her a deep satisfaction that transcended personal achievement. The respect and gratitude of her students motivated her to continue pushing the boundaries of what was possible in long-range shooting. One particularly memorable training session occurred when a visiting admiral challenged Maria to demonstrate her abilities under even more extreme conditions. The target was positioned at 4,500 meters, further than anyone had ever attempted to shoot accurately. The challenge took place during challenging weather conditions with gusty winds and variable atmospheric pressure. Maria spent nearly 2 hours studying the conditions before attempting the shot. She identified wind patterns that changed every 2 minutes rather than the 45-second cycles she had learned to expect. The increased distance meant that even tiny calculation errors would result in dramatic misses. The pressure was enormous, with dozens of high-ranking officers observing the attempt. When she finally fired, the bullet seemed to hang in the air forever before striking just 4 inches from the target center. The achievement represented a new record for documented long-range accuracy and validated the effectiveness of her teaching methods under the most demanding circumstances possible. The watching officers realized they were witnessing something truly exceptional. General Thompson had documented every aspect of Maria's success and the resulting training program improvements. His reports to military leadership emphasized the strategic value of identifying and incorporating unconventional expertise into military capabilities. The program had become a case study for innovation within traditional organizational structures. The success story had attracted media attention as well, though Maria preferred to avoid publicity whenever possible. Military journalists had written articles about the ranchwoman who revolutionized military marksmanship, but Maria consistently deflected credit to her students and the collaborative nature of the program's development. She understood that her individual achievements were less important than the systematic improvements in military capabilities. As the program continued to evolve, Maria began developing advanced curricula for teaching environmental reading skills to new generations of military marksmen. She worked with meteorologists to better understand atmospheric science, collaborated with ballistics experts to refine calculation methods, and partnered with equipment manufacturers to develop tools that complemented rather than replaced human intuition. The most rewarding aspect of her work came from letters and messages from soldiers who had applied her techniques in real combat situations. Several marksmen had successfully completed missions that required extreme long-range accuracy, potentially saving lives and accomplishing objectives that might otherwise have been impossible. These successes validated the practical value of her methods beyond training exercises and competitions. 1 year after asking, "Any snipers here?" General Thompson reflected on how much had changed. His simple question about available marksmen had led to the discovery of exceptional talent in an unexpected place. The development of revolutionary training methods and significant improvements in military capabilities. Maria's success had taught him to look beyond conventional sources when seeking solutions to complex challenges. The story of Maria Santos became part of military folklore, but its true value lay in the lasting changes it had produced. The integration of civilian expertise with military precision had created new possibilities for specialized training programs. Maria had proven that excellence could emerge from anywhere, and that traditional boundaries between military and civilian skills were often artificial limitations. As Maria continued her work training the next generation of long-range marksmen, she often thought about the moment she had stepped forward to ask for permission to try the impossible shot. That decision had changed not only her own life, but had contributed to meaningful improvements in military effectiveness. Her father's lessons about patience and precision, learned while protecting cattle in the Montana mountains, had found new purpose in preparing soldiers for the most challenging missions they might face. The simple question, "Any snipers here?" had received an unexpected answer that transformed military marksmanship training forever. Maria Santos had proved that sometimes the best solutions come from the most unlikely sources, and that asking the right question can reveal capabilities that no one knew existed.